I'll prove it to you. There's nothing new going on in the world today. Nothing new at all. Everything that's happening now has happened before. In 1220, Henry III lived in the White Tower and he didn't like it. He actually said, I don't like it, I don't like it. These Londoners, the common people, they're bad people. Don't like them. Got to keep them back, got to keep them out. We're going to build a wall. It's going to be a great wall. Who's going to pay for it? They are. Henry III actually levied a tax against the people of London to build a wall to keep them out. Right? So this thing that everyone's having a cow about in Mexico, that's not new. All right? It's happened before. All right? And don't think one wall will be enough. No. Edward I built the outer wall in the 1280s, and he surrounded it with a moat. It's not quite the Rio Grande, but you look at it. It's wide enough, isn't it? It's also a bit drier than you... Homage to a king you'd never met. No, so you had a referendum, didn't you? And you voted Emma-Exit. The only deal we got was bombs, bayonets, bullets, blood, and that barbarity at Boston when you savages threw tea in the sea. Yeah. All about representation, and now the media would have you believe that the representation has gone mad and that it won't be long before you're begging Her Majesty to take you back. Well, we might be able to do that soon, because for exactly the same reasons you've left us, but we're trying to leave the EU. So there you go, nothing new going on in the world today, and I want you to relax, because everything that you're getting excited and afraid about, it's happened before, and here's the thing that 1,000 years will teach you, it all gets better. No matter how bad the decisions are, no matter how bad the characters are, things turn out for the best because there's enough smart people around to make that happen, all right? So don't panic. Unlike Richard II. Richard II panicked. His fortress had been overrun and the moat had fought jihadists. All right, it was a holy war. The modern jihad has radical Muslims trying to turn the world to Islam. In the Crusade, extremist Christians tried to turn the world to Jesus. Make no mistake, it's exactly the same madness. Every 700 years we seem to take a turn. Gets a lot of people killed, doesn't really help anybody, but it does improve the fortress. Yes. When the Crusaders reached the holy town of Antioch, they realised that the Saracens, the Muslims, were cleverer than they were. They had built round towers. Stupidly, the Crusaders dug tunnels to find cornerstones in round structures. They couldn't drop these towers in the usual way, so they reinvented things from ancient history. The Romans had a fabulous war machine called a ballista, massive catapult that had hurled heavy objects great distances. In the language of the Crusades, it was rebranded trebuchet. They would hurl heavy objects at the round towers, but the round towers dissipate the energy of anything thrown at them much more efficiently than these square ones did. They couldn't knock them down. No. So, the Crusaders took to attacking the flat walls between the towers, and whenever they made a breach, they would charge up. But the round towers gave the Saracens overlapping arcs of fire, and they could cut the Crusaders down before they even got close. Great, this is military science. The only way the Crusaders broke the siege at Antioch, and later at Acre and Jerusalem, was to do what you all did today. They actually paid someone to open a gate. And that's absolutely true. But you won't find it in the chronicles of the Crusades, because the Crusades chronicles were written by knights and priests, and they want you to believe that chivalry is the good thing, but chivalry actually, paying someone to open a gate, that's cheating. So that's not chivalrous, so we'll just ignore that. In the chronicles of the Saracens, which were written on the orders of a truly great man, Saladin, a truly great Muslim, a truly great king, and a historian's dream, wanted an accurate chronicle of the Crusades. And even though he'd been betrayed by some of his Muslim brothers, he put that chapter in. So what does it mean for us? Well, if you're touring Europe and Scandinavia, looking at castles, right, looking at castles, and I've done this, I did this for 2 years while I was doing my history degree, you'll notice that if you see square towers, they're usually pre or early Crusades. All right. Well done, kids, well done. Right, getting closer, getting closer. I mean, they're more than welcome to stay, but this bit gets a bit grim. Coming closer, coming closer. Right. Okay. Right. This is the world infamous Traitors' Gate. Traitors' Gate is not its original name. Originally, this was known as the Watergate. Boats and barges would come in here and they would offload stores and provisions, and for that reason it very quickly became known as the Traders' Gate, like the tradesman's entrance, yeah? Now in the 16th century there was something of a human traffic, and it was largely one way. A lot of these people were prisoners, many accused of treason, and it was the watermen on the river that slid the name from Traders' Gate to Traitors' Gate. Oi! This is the earliest example of Cockney rhyming slang. All right? Now, I've had some fairly famous traitors come through here. You will have heard of Queen Anne Boleyn, Henry VIII's second wife. Queen Catherine Howard, Henry VIII's fifth wife. A disturbing pattern emerging there. I shall speak more of them later when I show you where they were killed and where they lie to this day. But on a happier note, behind you we have the Bloody Tower. Again, this is not its original name. Originally, this was known as the Garden Tower, and we changed it for marketing purposes. That's absolutely true. There is no mention of this as the Bloody Tower or the Tower of Blood until the mid-Victorian period, when, spookily enough, we opened to paying visitors for the first time. What the Victorians were trying to do was anchor stories of the tower in specific locations so they were better explained. One of the stories of the tower is the disappearance of King Edward V. He was just 12 years old. His younger brother, Richard, the Duke of York, was 9, and they did disappear. Gone from history. And they were last seen here. Here's the fact. There was a war on, the War of the Roses. These boys were targets. Their uncle Richard, Duke of Gloucester, was Constable of the Tower, and he brought them here for their protection. But they were losing the war. Richard of Gloucester had his nephews declared bastards by Parliament. They couldn't keep the crown. He took it, and he became King Richard III. He was now the target. His nephews were seen playing in the grounds long after his coronation, but they did disappear. Excuse me, one moment. Hello? Could you just be quiet, please? Keep the chatter down. I'm trying to give a tour here, and people are straining to hear over it. Thank you. That would be you. Right. So those are the facts. They disappeared. All right? Now that was all happening in 1483. Fast forward. 1485, Henry Tudor defeats Richard at the Battle of Bosworth, takes the crown from Richard's dead head, and declares himself king.
Hey.
Yeah. Fast forward. Henry Tudor has a granddaughter. Her name is Elizabeth I, and towards the end of her reign, the late 16th century, the early 17th century, she is entertained by a playwright called William Shakespeare. A playwright. Right, excuse me. I know you've got a class here, but I need you to be quiet. Shh. Be quiet. Thank you. Be excited, but be quietly excited. Right, so he's a playwright, and he writes plays. Some of these are called histories. In his play, Richard III, he tells us that one night, those boys fell asleep up there and never woke up. That during the night, they were smothered to death with their own pillows. Stabbed with a dagger, for good measure. And I'd like you children, especially you young children, to think about that at bedtime. Fast forward, 1674. Workmen on the south side of the White Tower remove a stone stairway. They discover the remains of two small people. The experts at the time declared these to be the bones of the princes. Charles II commands they be laid to rest in Westminster Abbey in Innocents' Corner that he named in their honour. Fast forward, 1933. Getting closer, aren't we? Getting closer. George V orders the exhumation of these bones for examination by modern medicine, which cannot determine if they're male or female. However, George V agrees with the consensus that way back in the 1600s they'd have known a bit more, declares them that it's unproven that they're not the princes, and says that they are never to be disturbed again and shall rest in peace forever. Sad that. Fast forward. The year 2002. I become a Yeoman Warder. I am told to tell people that Richard III was chopped up on the battlefield of Bosworth and his body parts thrown into the River Soar, never to be found again. That was a lie. I told that lie for 10 years. I didn't know it was a lie. No one did. It was in the history books. But in 2012, the history books had to be rewritten. Richard III had spent most of the last 600 years completely intact under the social services car park in Leicester, positively identified with DNA from a known descendant, a Canadian. Whoa! I know, I'm as disappointed as you all are. But those DNA markers will be present on those bones in Westminster Abbey if, and only if, they are his nephews. But because of George V, we cannot exhume them and check.
Oh.
That mystery will remain unsolved. And maybe that's a good thing. We should have some mystery in life. What facts can I tell you about the Bloody Tower? It is a marvel of medieval defensive architecture. The only way into the inner ward in its day. A 2.5-ton oak and steel portcullis, 700 years old and in perfect working order. Those gates beyond it, 3 tons. 5.5 tons of oak and steel you're going to have to hack through with your poxy little swords and axes. It'll take time. The luxury you do not have in battle with the defenders on the ramparts throwing everything at you. But the gates are open, so we'll charge through. Charge is a military term, means to move rapidly, to engage in eager combat with the enemy. So let's not have the Italians at the front.
Hey!
Anyone not yet been offended, let me know, or I'll try and fit you in. Charge!
Hey, let's go.
Closer. Yeah, about, well, a bit shorter than that chain, is it?
Yeah.
All right, Jane. Come closer then, dear, so you can see. That's fine. All right. All right. Now, everything that we've seen so far, and everything we've talked about so far, has been designed and built purely to defend that. That tree is sacred to the people of Britain. Now, if you look behind the tree, you'll see the White Tower, the Norman Keep. As I told you earlier, this was built on the orders of a Frenchman, William, Duke of Normandy, better known as William the Bastard, when he defeated the Saxon King Harold II at the Battle of Hastings on October the 14th, 1066. He chose this site, stupidly under the approach lanes to 2 airports, to build his principal palace and fortress, all right? Now, on Christmas Day, 1066, he was crowned King of England. His spin doctors went to work, and by the time he'd built this, he was known as William the Conqueror. The name stuck. For nearly 500 years, our kings and queens lived on the top floor. The floor below was the accommodation for their more favoured knights and their ladies. And the lowest floor with windows, that's where the kitchens were. It's where the servants and soldiers were billeted. There is, however, another floor.
Oh.
That floor is partly below ground, and the walls there are 15 feet, 5 meters thick, so there are no windows. It's dark.
Oh.
We're close to the river, below the water table. It is always damp and cold.
Hey.
And this was the perfect place for the
Dungeon.
the wine. It's a palace. Hello. Right. Palace. And do you want to put that down? I'll tell you when it's raining. Palace and fortress are built to keep people out. Prisons are built to keep people in. Yeah, make an effort to answer. Yeah. They're fundamentally different, and you need to think it through. Unlike us, we didn't think that through at all. Our first prisoner was a Frenchman. His name was Renaud de Flambard. He was the Bishop of Durham. It would be complete insanity to lock a French bishop, or believe me, any bishop, in a wine cellar. I know this to be true. I was an altar boy for 3 years, St. Aidan's Church. First lesson I ever got, Billy, keep the bishop away from the wine. He's here today, looks smart. Anyway, the only way I could do that was because he kept coming over, so I thought the only way I could do it was to drink it. 10 years old. I'm not proud of this at all, right? It's not big or clever. Anyway, Ranulph de Flambard was imprisoned in the top of the southwest turret in the year 1100, about as far away from the wine as you could get him. And he used to get on well with his warders. He would listen to their confessions. And he'd also offer them plenary indulgence. Now, I know a lot of you won't know what that means, so I'll explain it in the simplest terms I can. But it's actually very, very simple. Plenary indulgence is credit in the bank of sin. Yeah, it's kind of an insurance policy, because you don't know when you're going to die. And if you've sinned and you die, you're not going to heaven. Right? So plenary indulgence is forgiveness for sins you've not yet committed, but you might want to in the future, and you're covered. So that no matter when you die, you're going to heaven.
Yay!
It's an insurance policy. Like all insurance policies, it relies on an outlay of money. And what God ever needed with money, the bishops never fully explained. Now, let you make no mistake on this, the bishops of the Middle Ages were, by and large, charlatans. They didn't. Ranulph de Flambard was no exception. He was loaded. He didn't need the warders' money. He liked wine, and that's how they paid him. Wine brought up from the cellar in casks that were bound round with rope. And you might know where this is going. In the habit of drinking with his warders, one night the warders drank too much. They fell asleep. Ranulph de Flambard saw his moment, seized it. He removed the rope from these casks, and this French bishop rappelled 90 odd feet on an improvised line and got away. Our first prisoner escaped.
Yay!
He was our only prisoner at the time. One job! We had one job! Oh, later, the Tower of London becomes the most notorious prison in the world. But for years, we had a 100% escape record. And I find that reassuring. I really do. I do. Because it echoes a truth in life. It's not where you start that matters, it's where you finish that counts. And I want you kids to remember that, because you're under a lot of pressure, kids. You really are. You really are. You're at school, and you've got exams coming up, and your parents want you to do well, and your teachers want you to do well, and they're telling you if you don't do well, your life's going to be ruined, right? And I went through the same stuff, but at the age of 11, I quit school. I didn't go to school. I went off and played in the woods. It was great. My friends still went to school. When they came home from school, they got homework, but I was either watching telly or still playing in the woods. Here's something about my friends from school. They were successful, but none of them live in a castle.
Yay!
And this tells us, children, school is not important. Really isn't. And remember, kids, if you fail at school, the armed forces will nearly always say, welcome. Especially the army, all right? I left the army with a degree in history and a degree in paramedicine. So take your time, do it right, and enjoy the woods and the telly while you can, because they're going to rip your youth away from you soon enough. All right. Anyway, the White Tower today is full of great stuff. The armour of the kings, shield, lance, sword, bayonet, rifle, pistol, musket, cannon, mortars. All the good stuff is in there. But you are quite right. That lower chamber did become a place of torture. And it remains one to this day. Oh, it's a gift shop now. Now, I know one or two of you will have only come here for the crown jewels. One or two, yeah, it's always the shallow ones. And it's not because, yeah, he knows what I'm talking about, yeah. And it's not because you're interested in their history, you're not. You just want to make the man you're with feel inadequate, and you will. Now, under that clock over there, you're going to find a door. When you go through the door, you will see the world's largest perfect cut diamond at 530 carats. It's about the size of an egg. Don't compare your pitiful engagement ring to the Star of Africa. You'll also see what is largely regarded as the world's most beautiful diamond, the Koh-i-Noor, the Mountain of Light, the light of India. And as their names suggest, we've stolen them from everywhere. However, Her Majesty's government insists, I tell you, they were given to us by grateful nations. Often at gunpoint, they don't let me add. See what I did there? What did I do? I changed my voice. How many times are you asked to apologise for something you've never done?
None.
It's going to happen. It's going to happen. Of course it's happened, yeah. Because parents are unfair. And here's the thing, when they tell you to apologise to your brother or your sister or whoever, Aunt Mabel, right, what you do is you just change your voice. I'm sorry. And that way you keep a bit of your soul. Life lessons, kids. Didn't expect that on this tour, did you? There you go. Now, the crown jewels are very, very important to us. They're being guarded today by soldiers, and I do mean soldiers, of the Queen's Own Gurkha Logistic Regiment. That's a mouthful, isn't it? Now, you look at the Gurkhas there, they're in their famous pillbox hats. Notice that they are armed. I repeat, armed with a modern assault rifle. For those of you from the NRA, it is the L1A3 SA80 Heckler & Koch 5.56mm assault rifle. It has a 32 round magazine. Well, it's 30 round magazine. Bend the spring, you can get in 31. Put one up the spout. 32 rounds that you can fire on single or burst shot mode with a muzzle velocity of 940 metres per second, lethal and accurate at 1200 metres in the hands of a really decent shot. Do not upset the soldiers. Got it?
Yes.
Good. These are real soldiers. They're not carrying bayonets today, but if you get a good look at the back of him, you will see the cookery. That knife, if it is brought out of that scabbard, cannot be put back in unless it has drawn blood. So, you've been warned. This is Thai green, it's colour coded. It's the grass. Have to explain that. Because a lot of visitors, Germans actually, come here and spend an hour or so looking for the green tower. What is the green tower? What is the green tower? We don't have one. But it says here, Tower Green. Germans are lovely people, but they talk like Yoda. They've got syntax problems. So, for them, Tower Green. Grass it is. A tower it is not. Explain for you I have. Hopefully that's cleared that up, Austria. Right. You can visit the Beecham Tower. That arched window there lets light into a chamber, the walls of which are covered with graffiti. Some of that graffiti is nearly 500 years old. Yeah, graffiti is not a new problem, mate. No. Modern art is a new problem. This monstrosity, not you, perspex granite tubular steel is a monument to traitors and mutineers. Shouldn't exist. They deserve no monument. This is the site of the private execution scaffold. It was here that Henry VIII had 2 of his wives beheaded, and many husbands bring their wives back to admire this. First of these was, of course, Queen Anne Boleyn, but she was Henry VIII's second wife. His first wife was the beautiful Catherine of Aragon, a Spaniard. They were happily married for 17 years, actually married for 23 years. The last 6 years were made miserable because she could not produce a son. She'd given him a daughter. But that wasn't good enough. It rarely is. What, in historical terms? Kings wanted sons. You knew that, didn't you? Kings wanted sons. 2 sons, preferably. An heir and a spare. Henry VIII had been the spare. He shouldn't have been king. His brother Arthur should have been king. Arthur was older, but Arthur got flu. It killed him. I told you things have got better now. You don't die of flu. He got man flu, and back then it really killed you. Now it just knocks you out. So, when Henry Tudor died, his second son became King Henry VIII, and he married Catherine of Aragon to maintain an alliance with Spain. But young as she was, Catherine was already a widow, and it was her dead husband was Arthur. Henry VIII had married his sister-in-law. Seems weird now, but it was okay back then. On that technicality, though, they were granted a divorce, and he was now free to marry Anne Boleyn. Like Catherine, she gave him a daughter. What's your name, sweet pea? Ruby! Ruby, I'm loving your green nails, by the way. Marvellous. Bit of Irish there. Right, Ruby, I want you to remember this. Yes. That daughter turned out to be the greatest person that ever lived. I want you to remember that, Ruby. I want all you girls to remember this, that the greatest person that ever lived was a girl like you, not a boy like him. A girl like you, not a boy like him. A girl! The greatest person that ever lived was a girl. Her name was Elizabeth. And when she became queen, she was Gloriana Regina, the glorious queen. She created the greatest thing the world would ever know. She created the greatest era the world would ever know. She created the British Empire. And you might think, oh, that's old hat. That's right. So back in the past, that doesn't matter anymore. It doesn't affect us in our day-to-day lives. Think again. If it was not for Elizabeth I, I would now be speaking to all of you in Spanish, and you all would understand. That's right, Spain, in your face. Might want to remember that next time you bring up Gibraltar at the Brexit table.
Ooh.
So there you go, Ruby. Greatest person that ever lived was a girl. This is what a feminist looks like. Henry VIII was no feminist. He wanted sons, and Anne Boleyn tried hard, really hard, and not just with Henry. Anne Boleyn was found guilty of adultery with 5 men, and one of those was her brother. When you're married to a king, that's treason. Personally, I don't care who you're married to. It's excessive. More than a bit odd. Not for her, the block and axe. She has to go out French fashion with a 2-handed sword. 19th of May, 1536, she knelt hereabouts, praying for forgiveness, and as she prayed, a Frenchman took off her head with one stroke of a sword. It was a beautiful job. Public records tell us that when her severed head was held up, the witnesses gasped in amazement and horror. It had been so clean that her eyes continued to gaze around at the faces in the crowd. And for quite some time, whilst her neck drained the blood from her head, her lips continued to move. You've got to ask yourself, was she conscious? And the answer is, we shall never know. But if she was conscious, I'm pretty sure she was thinking, I didn't see that coming. Anne Boleyn was convinced she was going to get a reprieve. She waited 17 days for her execution, because the execution had to come from France. In all that time, there was no arrangement made for a funeral. There was no coffin. Anne Boleyn, Queen of England, and obviously quite a bit shorter now, had to be stuffed into a humble arrow box. That arrow box lies inside that chapel, under the altar. As her head was rolling in the straw, a cannon fired on the wharf. It was the signal to Henry that he was single. He galloped off and proposed to Jane Seymour. What was she thinking? She must have known that his first wife was dying in poverty in some hunting lodge, and that his second wife had just been executed on his orders, and she just says, yes, you're my kind of guy. Henry VIII and Jane Seymour were married just 11 days after the execution of Anne Boleyn, on May the 30th, 1536. In September the following year, she gave Henry a son.
Hey!
And had a massive postpartum bleed and died.
Oh.
Henry VIII now had 3 children he could talk about and no wife. In the modern era, a man might turn to the internet. That's what I did. It's true. Single, live in a castle, central London, with parking close to the shops. Match.com, eHarmony, Guardian, Soulmates, never got a date. Plenty of fish, got loads of dates, they were rubbish. Plenty more fish was worse, and uniform dating was... I don't want to talk about that. Henry VIII did something remarkably similar with the technology available at the time, and that technology was Holbein, a great portrait painter. His portraits are here in London, in the National Portrait Gallery. You can see them for free. You've got to love that about London. The gallery's free.
Yeah.
Right? Go and see his paintings. They're marvellous. They've got a photographic-like quality. Holbein was sent to Europe and Scandinavia looking for likely candidates for marriage, painting them and sending the paintings back to Henry, who received them. Left pile. Left pile. Left pile. In a town called Claver in Germany, he painted a girl called Anne of Claver. But he mispronounced it, Anne of Cleves, and no one argued. He didn't with Henry. And we've called it Anne of Cleves ever since. Now, Henry loved this painting so much, they were married before they'd ever met. And you're probably wondering how that could happen. Marriage is essentially a contract. And the contracts were written up by all the legal people and everything long before that, long before they'd even met. All they had to do was meet, consummate the marriage, and that was it. She was the new queen. They met at Rochester Castle in Kent, and Holbein made himself scarce. Holbein was an artist. Artists see things we can't. He had painted her inner beauty.
Oh boy.
She did not look like her profile picture. I told you there is nothing new going on in the world today. Right? Of course, Henry VIII didn't say anything about profile pictures. He is reported to have bellowed, "By God, she looks like a horse, and not one I'd like to ride." Now, the thing was that all the celebration had taken place. They were left on their own to consummate the marriage, and they both had a discussion. Don't want to do this, neither do I. Well, that's good. That's a relief. Shall we just not do it and annul the marriage? Yes, please. Right, they were both happy with that. Yeah, Anne of Cleves, Anne of Claver, got an annual stipend of £8,000, a hideous amount of money, and the run of 5 palaces.
Wow.
Catherine of Aragon, who had contested her divorce, died in poverty in a hunting lodge. And there's a lesson there, but I'm not sure what it is. This did pave the way for a tragedy. Henry's 5th wife was Catherine Parr. She was 19 years old, cute thing, liked dancing, lively girl. Henry was 51, morbidly obese with a variety of diseases that today would respond really well to penicillin. There was no love in the marriage. She sought comfort outside. She had an affair. She got caught. She admitted her adultery. Here on the scaffold, she proclaims it. "I die the Queen of England," she said. "I'm ready. Much rather would I have lived and died the humble wife of the only man to have ever loved me, Thomas Culpeper." She probably shouldn't have said that. Thomas Culpeper certainly thought so. He was hanged, drawn and quartered.
Ooh.
Catherine Howard was beheaded. She too lies under the altar. Henry's 5th wife was Catherine Parr. Closer to his own age, she was 30. She was a widow and a skilled nurse, and it's a great comfort to me, as a Catholic, that he needed her. He needed a nurse. Henry VIII's last years were characterised by pain, and he probably died in agony. Go Catholics. There you have it. So far, the history of the tower. Now, a few words before I let you go. I'm about to retire. I've only got about 17 working days left, and I am going to miss it. So, what I want to do is take a video of you all and pretend you're my friends.
Yay!
And this video is going to go on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram under the account Billy Beefeater, right? So, if you've enjoyed it, well, I could get a Mexican wave going. If you've enjoyed it, thumbs up and a big cheer. And if you've not enjoyed it, thumbs up and a big cheer. If you want to rip me apart, do it on TripAdvisor. Okay, right, here we go. Ready? Wait for it. I'm going to introduce you. This is the 12:30 tour.
Yay! Yay! Go, Bill!
Ladies, gentlemen, if you've got questions for me, you can hit me online. Billy Beefeater, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Could be stuck in a pub quiz. Medieval defensive architecture, I'm your man.
Yay!
If you've got questions today, you're going to have to ask my colleagues. They'll be only too pleased to talk to you. I do mean that. We don't want you to have a good day here. We want you to have a great day. If you're not having a great day, you must come and tell us. We always find that amusing. Ladies, gentlemen, you're only ever as good as your audience. As an audience today, you've been terrific. You've laughed in most of the right places. It's been a real pleasure showing you around.
Thank you! Yay!